The snow had been falling since noon, burying the city under a silence that felt more like punishment than peace. Behind a shuttered strip mall on the east side of Cleveland, a woman sat curled in the driver's seat of a rusted Honda Civic, 3 blankets piled over her lap, her breath fogging the windshield in slow, tired clouds. Her name was Wren, 24 years old. Once a line supervisor at an auto parts factory. Now just another face the city had stopped counting. She pressed her forehead to the cracked steering wheel and whispered into the dark, the way she'd started doing some nights when the silence got too loud to sit in alone. If there's a reason I'm still here, I could use a sign. Any sign. 300 yards away, behind the fogged windows of a gas station off West 25th, a black SUV was circling for the 3rd time. Then the gunshots came. 2 of them, flat and close, cracking the frozen air apart. Wren's whole body locked up in the driver's seat, every instinct screaming at her to stay exactly where she was, engine off, lights off, invisible. That was the smart thing. Nobody would have blamed her for staying in that car until morning. But she didn't stay. She grabbed the tire iron from under her seat and ran, sneakers soaked through before she'd covered half the distance to the pumps. What she found stopped her cold. A man in a police uniform, flat on his back, blood spreading dark and fast against the white ground, one hand pressed weakly to his shoulder like he was trying to hold the whole night together with 2 fingers. "Hey, stay with me," Wren said, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes found hers, glassy, unfocused. "Radio's gone," he managed. She was already stripping off her sweatshirt, the only clean layer she owned, and pressing it hard into the wound. She didn't think about the cold that would come for her the second she gave it up. She thought about the poster in the factory break room that showed you how to stop a bleed, and she thought about nothing else. "My car's right there. I can get you to St. Vincent's faster than backup that isn't coming." "Don't move me," he rasped. "Protocol." "Protocol didn't stop you bleeding out in a gas station lot," she snapped, and something in her voice made him stop arguing. She hauled him up by his good arm and dragged him through the snow to the Civic, and by the time she pulled out onto Lorraine Avenue, running a red light at an empty intersection without a second thought, her hands were shaking so hard she almost couldn't hold the wheel. "Talk to me. Tell me your name. Stay awake." "Marrow," he mumbled. "Officer Marrow." "Okay, Officer Marrow. I'm Wren. You are not dying in my backseat. I don't have the energy to explain that to anybody tonight." Somewhere between the gas station and the emergency room doors, he almost smiled. The waiting room at St. Vincent Charity lit up with movement the second Wren burst through the doors shouting for help. Within 90 seconds he was gone down a hallway, swallowed by people whose whole job was keeping him alive. Nobody thought to ask who Wren was. She wasn't family. She was just the woman who'd carried a stranger through the doors and then had nowhere else to be, so she sat in a plastic chair and stayed until sunrise. A nurse finally noticed her around 6. "Are you hurt? Do you want to leave your information? He'll probably want to thank you." Wren almost laughed. Leave her information. She didn't have an address. "I don't really have a way for him to reach me," she admitted. "Just tell him I hope he's okay." She walked out into a grey Cleveland morning without her sweatshirt, wind cutting through denim like it wasn't there, and didn't look back. What she didn't see, 40 minutes later, was the black Suburban that pulled up outside the hospital's private entrance, or the silver-haired man in a coat that cost more than her car who stepped out flanked by 2 men in dark suits, moving through the hallway with a kind of authority that made even the charge nurse straighten her spine without being told to. He didn't sign in at the front desk. He didn't need to. "Where is my son?" he said, and it wasn't a question. For days passed before Callahan Voss said a coherent sentence to anyone, and when he finally did, it wasn't about his shoulder, and it wasn't about the silver-haired man who had sat beside his bed in total silence for 6 hours the night before. "Find the woman who brought me in," he told the nurse. "The one with no home. I need to talk to her." Detective Priya Okonkwo-Reyes was the one who found her, for days of canvassing shelters, laundromats, and a mutual aid pantry on Fulton Road before someone finally said the name Wren out loud. Priya found her exactly where a barista on Lorraine said she might be, parked outside the same strip mall, doing the math on how many more days a tank of gas could stretch. "Ms. Ashcombe? I'm not here to move you along. I'm here because a man you saved is asking for you." The hospital room was quiet when Wren finally walked in, and stuffed deep in her jacket pockets. Callahan was sitting up, shoulder bandaged, and when he saw her, something in his face shifted. "You're the woman who dragged 200 pounds of dead weight into a Honda Civic. You're the man who almost died arguing about protocol," Wren shot back, and for a second the room cracked open into something almost like a laugh. "I need to ask you something," he said, "quieter now. That night, before you got to me, did you see the men who did it? Their faces, the vehicle? It happened fast. But I saw the driver, for a second, under the dome light. I'd probably know him again." Something tightened behind Callahan's eyes. "That's a problem. For both of us. What does that mean?" He glanced at the door like the walls might be listening. "My name isn't Marrow. It's Callahan Voss. I've spent the last 18 months undercover inside my own department, investigating a corruption ring, officers skimming money off drug seizures and laundering it through a shell company. The men who shot me weren't robbers. They were cops. And if you can identify the driver, you're now holding a piece of the exact case I've spent a year and a half building." Wren felt the blood leave her face. "You're telling me I patched up an undercover investigator with my sweatshirt? I'm telling you the man driving that SUV is connected to people who will not want a witness walking around this city," Callahan said. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise you that. You're currently attached to an 4-pole," Wren said flatly. "Forgive me if that's not exactly reassuring." He laughed, a short, pained sound, and for the first time since the snow, something in Wren allowed itself to hope. She excused herself not long after, telling him she needed air, and it was in the hallway outside his room, in front of a mounted television nobody was really watching, that the second earthquake of her week arrived. A local anchor's voice, flat and rehearsed, "New details this morning on the officer shot outside a West Side gas station last week. Sources confirm the injured officer is not, in fact, career police, is Callahan Voss, the estranged heir to Voss Industrial, missing from public life for nearly 2 years while working an undercover assignment inside the Cleveland Police Department. The Voss family, worth an estimated $2.3 billion, has declined to comment beyond confirming Callahan is recovering and are proud of the work he's done." Wren stood frozen in the hallway, the paper cup of vending machine coffee going cold in her hand. $2.3 billion. She looked back through the glass at the man sitting up in a hospital bed in a paper-thin gown, the same man she dragged through snow with her bare hands, the same man whose blood was still, somewhere, dried into the fabric of a sweatshirt she'd never see again. She didn't go back in right away. When she finally did, she didn't sit down. "You're a billionaire," she said. It wasn't a question either. Callahan's face didn't do the thing she expected, no defensiveness, no performance of humility. Just tired honesty. "My father is. I walked away from that when I was 23. So you could have bought every motel on Brook Park Road while I was sleeping in a Civic," Wren said, and her voice had an edge in it now that surprised even her. "You could have fixed my life with a phone call, and instead you let me drive you to a hospital not knowing you had more money than God." "I didn't know you," Callahan said quietly. "That night, you didn't save a billionaire, Wren. You saved a man you thought had nothing to give you." The room went very still. "You thought I had nothing," he said again, softer. "And you stopped anyway." Wren opened her mouth to argue and found she didn't have anything to argue with. It landed somewhere underneath her anger, somewhere old, somewhere that had nothing to do with him. "My brother," she said finally, the words coming out before she decided to say them. 3 years ago. He collapsed outside a Rite Aid in Palmer. 11 people walked past him. 11. Somebody finally called it in, but by the time anyone stopped, it was too late. Her jaw tightened. "I used to think about those 11 people every single night I slept in that car. I promised myself if I was ever the 12th person, I wasn't going to keep walking. Callahan didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry about your brother." "Don't be sorry," Wren said. "Just don't ever tell me you had nothing to give. You had everything. I just didn't know it, and it didn't matter. That's not the same thing as needing my forgiveness for hiding it." He nodded slowly, and something in the space between them settled into a new, more honest shape. Detective Okonkwo set Wren up in an extended-stay motel off Brook Park Road under a name that wasn't her own. For the first time in 6 months, Wren slept under an actual roof, and she lay awake most of that first night listening to the radiator hum, half convinced she'd wake up back in the Civic. Callahan visited when he could, walking her through surveillance photos, waiting for her eyes to catch on something. "Him," Wren said one afternoon, tapping a photo without hesitation. "That's the driver. That jaw, that haircut. I'd know him anywhere." The man in the photo was Deputy Chief Roland Pruitt, 22 years on the force, a face that had shaken hands with 3 mayors, and the man Callahan's 18 months of quiet work had identified as the one running the operation from inside his own command staff. "He used to buy me lunch on my birthday," Callahan said, and something in his jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," Wren said. "Don't be. Be careful. If Pruitt finds out there's a witness, he won't hesitate to make her disappear." "I didn't drag you out of that parking lot to bail now," Wren said. "I'm in." The danger arrived on a Tuesday night. Wren came back from the corner store to find the motel room door standing open, the frame splintered where a shoulder had forced it, the mattress slashed, her few belongings scattered across the floor. Scrawled in marker across the bathroom mirror, 3 words. "Don't testify, Wren." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She backed out into the parking lot on legs that didn't feel like her own and called the only number she trusted, and Callahan arrived in 9 minutes, badge and undercover persona both abandoned now. "They know your name," he said, staring at the door. "They know your name, which means someone inside is still feeding them information." For the first time since the gas station, Wren felt real fear settle into her chest instead of adrenaline. "Maybe I should disappear," she said quietly. "Take whatever relocation money you people have and go somewhere nobody knows what I look like." She meant it when she said it. She packed a bag that night. She sat in the passenger seat of Callahan's car with her hand on the door handle, ready to let the department drive her to a bus station and out of this story entirely. Then she looked down at her wrist, at the faint pink scar where the tire iron's rough edge had caught her skin the night of the shooting, and she thought about 11 people walking past a man on a sidewalk in Palmer. She took her hand off the door handle. "No," she said. "I'm not running. I already decided who I am. I decided it in the snow." 3 days later, wired and flanked by federal agents 2 blocks away, Callahan walked into a bar on the east side to meet Pruitt, who believed this was a private conversation between old colleagues. "You were a good cop, Voss," Pruitt said, leaning back in the booth. "Could have had a real career. Instead you played hero for some homeless girl, and now you're both a problem I have to solve." "Solve how?" Callahan asked. "However it needs solving. You used to be one of us. It should have been enough. It should have ended there." Instead, Pruitt's eyes flicked, almost lazily, to the collar of Callahan's shirt, and stopped. "You're wired," he said, and his voice went cold in a way Callahan had never heard from him before. "You son of a bitch." For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Pruitt's hand drifted toward his jacket. Callahan's pulse hammered against the recorder taped to his ribs, every instinct in him screaming that 18 months of work was about to die in a bar booth along with him. Then, from the doorway, a voice. "Deputy Chief Pruitt." Detective Okonkwo Reyes, badge raised, for agents fanning out behind her. "We already have what we need. Ms. Ashcombe placed you at that gas station 3 weeks ago. Your own financial records did the rest. The wire was just a formality." Pruitt's hand stopped moving. His face, for the first time in 22 years of shaking Mayor's hands, had nowhere left to go. He was in federal custody within the hour, along with 2 of the officers who'd stood beside him in that parking lot. The trial moved fast once the recording and the financial trail were laid side by side. Wren testified on a grey Tuesday morning, her voice steady, describing the SUV, the gunshots, the face under the dome light she'd never forget. When she stepped down, Callahan was in the second row, and for the first time since the snow, she let herself believe this part might actually be over. Pruitt was convicted on racketeering, conspiracy, and attempted murder of a police officer. The department gave Wren a formal commendation on the steps of City Hall. A local anchor asked how it felt to go from sleeping in a car to standing there in a coat that actually fit her. "I didn't do anything special," Wren said. "I just didn't drive away." The Voss family didn't hand Wren an apartment and a check and call it gratitude, and Wren wouldn't have accepted it if they had. "I didn't save your son because he could change my life," she told Callahan's father plainly, the first and only time they sat across from each other in his glass office downtown. "I saved him because I thought nobody else would." Instead, 6 months later, a new non-profit opened its doors in a converted warehouse on the near West Side, funded by Voss Industrial, run day-to-day by a woman who knew exactly what it felt like to fill out a job application with no address to put on the form. They called it the Ashcombe Initiative. It didn't hand out charity. It handed out interviews, temporary housing, laundry vouchers, and the kind of dignity Wren had spent 6 months learning to protect with her bare hands. Callahan visited most evenings now, badge restored to his real name, shoulder fully healed. One evening he found her in the doorway of her own apartment, her name on the lease this time, and handed her a coffee. "You know," he said, "Internal Affairs wants to write the case up as a training example." "Tell them it wasn't the witness," Wren said, smiling. "Tell them it was the tire iron." He laughed, the unguarded kind she'd only started hearing from him in the last few months. A few weeks after that, driving home past the old strip mall on the east side, Wren slowed without quite deciding to. A woman was sitting in a car in the same corner of the lot, 3 blankets over her lap, breath fogging the windshield. Wren parked. Walked over. Knocked gently on the glass. "Hey," she said, when the window came down an inch. "I know this looks like nothing right now." "It isn't. Are you hungry?" She spent that night on a strip mall parking lot, asking the universe for a sign. She never realized the sign wasn't the man bleeding in the snow. It was the woman who chose to run toward him.